Yeah, hi. My name's Buck, and what I'd like to do is talk to you about miracles. Now, miracles are things that can't happen, but by golly, they do. And they happen to everyone, but most of the time we just don't notice. We fail to recognize them because they're not in our psyche. They just can't happen. A miracle is something that defies all logic, and yet they happen. And we see them all the time, like on the news when there's a tornado and hundreds of houses or a whole community is destroyed and only one person dies. How does that happen? You think there isn't divine intervention? Oh, come on now. Don't be ridiculous. Most miracles are from the divine. God happens to be all around. He's everywhere. And creatures such as angels exist. But this first story that I want to tell happened to me when I was 22 years old, and it wasn't necessarily, in fact, I don't think it was, a religious experience at all. I think it was a gift of the mind. Now, by that I don't mean I fantasized. What I mean is the mind is more powerful than most of us realize, and it has more functions. Its capabilities are far grander than we realize, and it is also responsible for just about everything that happens to us. Anyway, the year was 1962. I know this because I had a Ford Starliner 1962, brand new, that I had bought as a young sailor. I think I was a third class. Now, that car was out of my pay grade, but I bought it, okay? At the time, I was stationed in the Navy in Imperial Beach, California. It was a foggy morning, really foggy, and I had to go to work. It was somewhere around 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, as the name Imperial Beach implies, it's on the ocean. Beaches tend to be sandy, and sand was all over Imperial Beach. It's just the makeup of the soil there. Sand is light and it blows. Well, it turns out that there was sand that had blown across the road that I had to go to work on at a stop sign. I came to this stop sign. It was a really foggy morning. The stop sign was at a 4-lane boulevard that I had to cross. I couldn't see, not to my left, not to my right. I couldn't see past the hood of my car. I looked to my left, I couldn't see anything. I looked to my right, I couldn't see anything, but I knew that getting across that street was chancy. Finally, I decided I've got to go for it. Well, I was in the Navy. I had to get to work or I was going to be AWOL. So I stepped on the gas, started across the highway, and wouldn't you know, just as I started, got speed going up good enough, but I'm still at the stop sign in that area, a car is coming from my left. I see it coming. I stomped on the brake, but like I was alluded to earlier, I was on sand. And when I locked up the brakes, the car didn't stop. It just kept sliding forward. And as I'm sliding forward, this car is going forward. There's a man sitting in the passenger seat, and he was looking straight ahead when I first saw him, and then I saw him look over at me. The car is not stopping. I essentially ran into him. I mean, I could see this, but there's no crunch. There's no denting there. I'm not getting knocked about. I'm just sliding forward all the way up to my firewall as the car is going by. I sat there for a moment and I couldn't figure out what happened. Well, let me back up just a little. My dad was a fanatic about keeping his cars clean, not getting scratches, not getting dents on them. And I kind of inherited that from him. Now, a young sailor, bought a car out of his pay grade. I didn't want any scratches or dents or anything to happen to this car. It was my pride and joy. And as I saw what was going to happen, I literally shouted, "No!" I call that now a cosmic shout, okay? After the car had passed by, I sat there, my hands on the steering wheel. I didn't know what happened. I couldn't figure it out. I don't know what the reaction was of the guy that was looking at me. He's probably still trying to figure it out after all this time. This was a miracle. I would call it a miracle, but it wasn't from the divine. I believe what it is. I believe that you and I have minds that are capable of far more than we realize. And I believe that I was so dead set against anything happening to this car that I, in essence, just everything became atomized. I don't know what other word to use. And I think the molecules just separated. And as the car went by, everything was all right. I don't know how to explain it. I mean, if you can tell I'm struggling here. This happened to me when I was 22. I'm 80 now. I've had a lot of time to figure it out, and I haven't. But I do know that the human mind, is far more capable of things than we realize. Now, one time, years later, maybe 10 years ago, I used this story in a sermon. After the sermon, we had a visitor that day of a small church, Olivet Presbyterian Church in Glendale, Oregon. We had a visitor that day. He just showed up on that day. I never saw him again afterwards. And I have a feeling that this is where the divine came in. That he was there because he needed to hear this story. Because he came up to me after the service and he thanked me for telling that. And he said, something happened to me years ago that I've never told anybody. He said, I was driving too fast on a dirt road out in the country. And I came to a curve in the road. And I couldn't see, but another car was coming. And I was going too fast to stop. And he essentially did the same thing I did, shouted no. He said, my car, we didn't collide, we should have, but we didn't. My car was lifted up and that car went under me, and then I came back down on the road and continued on. I didn't know how to handle that. It was just strange. And so I bottled it up for all these years. Never told a soul. These things happen. They really do. When they do, many times, because these things can't happen, can they? We don't know how to handle them when they do. And so we put it out of our mind. The human brain is capable of far more than we realize. And it's also responsible for where we are in life. It is responsible for the friends that we have. I call it the kindred spirit connection. There's a connection between like human beings. We attract people who are like ourselves. This is a true story. I'm not a wacko. Well, I may be, but if I am, don't tell anybody. It happened. I didn't know how to handle it. I sat there at that intersection and finally just went across the intersection, went to work, never told a soul. until I told it in that sermon, maybe 10 years ago, maybe more. Make of it what you will. I have a whole lot more of these. Make of it what you will. But I know that the human mind is capable of more than we. I have mind control exercises that are kind of fun, and I will share them with you at a later date. But you can see for yourselves that you can do things. You can have an influence on things that are not near you, and you can see it happen. And I'd be glad to share it with you. I hope you enjoyed this. Make of it what you will. Just say that old buck, he's a wacko. And maybe I am. If I am, I'm a happy one. I hope you enjoyed this story. Bye-bye.